Joe Mullings from 160 Studios, almost live. So we were trying LinkedIn Live this morning and we were having some issues with Wirecast and I had my Bill O'Reilly moment. So if you don't know what the Bill O'Reilly moment is, go look at YouTube. Bill O'Reilly loses his mind in the middle of a broadcast. So we're sort of live. We're here on YouTube and streaming into LinkedIn. Okay, so I'm over that. Where is the job market going? That is the question that I get asked very often. Friends, family, professional people I'm engaged with on a daily basis. And, you know, that's a tough one to answer straight up. But what I can tell you is there are many stakeholders. You've got government, you've got industry, you've got yourself, probably most importantly, you've got the pandemic, and then you just have societal issues going on. You can't control any of those. The only one you can control is what you do and what you choose to do. And then also, how do you untangle or deduce where the market is going? And I refer to it as the Gretzky career puck. Gretzky always said he was amazing, not because he knew where the puck was, but he knew where the puck was going to be before most other people. And the same is true with your career. You need to manage your career like the Gretzky career hockey puck. And so keep that in mind as we run through some of the dialogue today. So let's just jump into some stats here. Job losses heavy amongst service workers. In July, there were 2% fewer jobs in America paying more than $60,000 a year than in January. But jobs paying under $27,000, they were 16% scarcer. So that is eating into a different demographic of the marketplace. New service jobs exploding. Home delivery, suburban restaurants will eventually replace those in city centers. In fact, new job categories for service jobs directly related to the pandemic have been created. Anything from caregivers to contract tracers to food delivery to technology. And loosening of government regulations, thank goodness for this. Let's hope the genie doesn't go back in the bottle on some of this. But example, food law in California allows people to operate licensed restaurants from inside their homes. How about that? No longer need a brick and mortar restaurant to be a restaurateur. That's sad for the restaurateurs who are brick and mortar. It is exciting for those who are probably unbelievable cooks. Their mom had taught them or dads had taught them in previous generations, but now can actually flex that. And again, tech jobs also accelerating before COVID continue to show exponential growth. So look, here's what we have to look at. Whenever you get involved in a scenario like we're in, it's wreaked havoc on everything. Exposed the weaknesses in the workforce makeup, hospitality, services sector, healthcare industry. We've watched how things have just pretty much been shattered as we've become accustomed to. Nobody was prepared for this, but those have responded well are doing extraordinarily well. You know, we're hearing all the hubbub around certain stocks such as Amazon, Tesla, and other platform technologies doing extraordinarily well, and people are getting upset at them, and that is just absolutely ridiculous to get upset at somebody who's doing well. It's not their fault that you're not doing well. It's not a zero-sum gain on that. What you want to do is look at those organizations and understand why are they doing so well, because they are addressing issues that are sort of front and center, especially during this sort of pandemic. Longitudinally over time, catalysts like what we're in right now change society for good. And I mean for good, not for the better of good, but for good forever. And this is definitely one of those moments in time. If you don't subscribe to that, then you're probably going to have a challenge in navigating your career moving forward because it's these times that others thrive and others do not. And how you choose to pivot and move forward on the data and the evidence in front of you will determine everything. The world is what it is. It usually is not how you want it to be. And so as you adjust on those types of mindsets, that's going to be critically important for you. So as mentioned, business, governments, industrial leaders, real estate, and societal protection groups are going to define what the job market looks like moving forward. But I can tell you that every job is at risk right now if you're going to compare it to looking backwards over your shoulder versus forward. Even the safest tech jobs of all time are going to transition. Why? Consumers have to adapt, and they have adapted. That's one thing that always moves first: consumer behavior. After that, it forces industries to adapt. It then forces workers to adapt. And then eventually it forces governments to adapt. Consumer, technology, those markets adapt very quickly. But what is really scary that does not adapt quickly is the linchpin of it all is government. Government just does not adapt quickly. That's a good thing and a bad thing. It's tough to make a U-turn with the Queen Mary. It's that inability to make a U-turn at times that saves us, and at times puts categories of people at risk. If you think about most government regimes, it is 60 to 80-year-old white men who are wealthy, who are sitting at the helm and deciding what is good is what is bad for them first, and the balance of people second. And I don't mean that as a Democrat or a Republican. I'm just thinking about human nature. Is society right now is in the middle of a digital transition that has never been felt before. And if you're a 60 to 80-year-old white male, in our country especially, the odds of you being a digital native are zero. Meaning that you might have aides and people next to you that are quote unquote digital experts in the impact. But in general, viscerally down deep, you cannot understand how a digital driven environment is going to impact the worker at the lowest level and the highest level. And with this digital transition, it's critically important that we get it more right than more wrong. Because this transition, when you take this down range, if we miss by a few degrees, you're going to get entire categories of workers who are going to be deemed as irrelevant moving forward. So that concerns me. Lower wage workers, challenges to access to technology, inability for training for upskilling or reskilling, the mindset of self-learning. These are all critical components that have to be adapted and adopted by you and a government. You know, a majority of the world is disconnected. Here's something super interesting. Being able to get online is one thing, but being able to have access to broadband, which are downstream speeds of 256 kilobits per second, is another. And that applies to education and work. Less than 30% of the US population has access to broadband. Less than 15% of the world's population has access to broadband. Digital is the pipeline to opportunity. So if you do not have access to broadband, and we're seeing this on a micro level, even though it's a macro level in schools and education, and the less privileged people who don't have access to broadband, let alone a computer in most places, that's going to have generational impact. So look, I'm starting out on the calling out the liabilities. I am the optimist who looks for the liabilities in everything. And all this has sort of identifications around it about what you need to be looking at as you review where is your career going to go. Some, as mentioned, are going to have minimal risk, others maximal risk. But I bring up some of the liabilities because in the liabilities lies the opportunities. Rarely are there opportunities when everything is ideal. The magnified opportunities come out in the gaps, and that's what you want to seek out. So, skill set, upskill and reskill, super important. Industry has a responsibility to upskill and reskill the current workforce. Education alone cannot do that. The education system cannot do that at the speed and rate of acceleration of technology. And I'll dig into that in a couple minutes. Because we're moving into a world of automation and robotics. And because I specialize in that area, I get asked that question a lot. Is automation and robotics going to replace the worker? And the answer is yes. in the repetitive tasks that happen millions of times a year over and over and over in a predictable fashion again, those opportunities, those jobs are definitely at risk. But automation and robot-induced employment, not reduced, induced employment is a very real thing. There are more opportunities coming out because of robotics and because of automation in new job categories that had not been there before. So you definitely want to look at where are the adjacent opportunities to automation and robotics. And here's where the door opens and swings open wide. The profile of the worker that's been emerging over the last 5 years has been increasing combination of cognitive skills, critical thinking, socio-behavioral skills. In other words, EQ, team skills, and the ability to recognize emotions. Robots and automation can't do that. Since 2001, this category of employment in occupations that require cognitive and socio-behavioral skills has increased from 19 to 23% in emerging economies and 33 to 41% in advanced economies. So what does that tell you? That tells you that you've got to have the ability to collaborate, have critical thinking, have a high level of EQ and IQ, and be able to read situations. And as we move forward in this world, you are going to have to upskill and reskill a lot more frequently than previous generations. And upskilling and reskilling requires those characteristics and a large dose of humility. Because if you're going to be a great learner, you need to be humble. So you can have an enormous ego and still be humble. They can coexist. And those people typically do extraordinarily well. But in order you to upskill and reskill all the time, you've got to remain humble. And again, it is not something we've been taught generationally until the last 5 to 10 years. Historically, your grandfather, your great-grandfather, your grandmother, your mom and dad likely were locked and loaded on a career for 30 years, 40 years, and sometimes even the same job. So it's important to note that right away, you should be taking to your interviews and your communications and your engagement with the workforce with examples of upskilling and reskilling that you've demonstrated over the last 1, 3, 5 years. Think of hobbies you've taken up. Think of things that you've learned online. Thinking of certifications online. We're seeing this evidenced by industry. Companies like Amazon, Alibaba, Google, Tencent, Apple, AT&T, Verizon, who are dictating global trade, are dictating worker career trajectories. They are redefining the educational system moving forward by themselves. They are not waiting for university to do so. They're having scholarships giving out left and right, perhaps because they're benevolent, but also because they're capitalists. And they know the current university system cannot feed them workers quick enough. And those workers who are coming out typically are coming out with expired skill sets relative to contextually what is needed today. Let's jump into private sector now. In the private sector, the service regime of that is 70% of the GDP in the US. So 4 out of 5 private sector jobs are in the service field, and the service field represents 70% of GDP in the US. It doesn't mean we've stopped making things. We still manufacture a lot of things in the US. But when we manufacture those things, they're typically circled with services that go with them. Whether it's satellite service, whether it's an AI service, whether it's machine learning, but there is a service associated with those. And when you think about an iPhone, you have iPhone hardware, but sitting on that are primarily service-driven technologies. You guys are talking in there? No? Okay. So food business, finance and insurance, $76 billion. Movies and media, $49 billion. Hotels and travel, $236 billion. So let's unwind a category right now. Let's unwind the food and restaurant business. And how would I look at the restaurant business and the food business moving forward? If we've got travel tremendously impacted because of this pandemic, that means that we've got business travel and pleasure. We've got restaurant, we've got entertainment. All that has been critically wounded. But there are businesses that are pivoting out of that very, very quickly. So be super careful on what you romantically fall in love with from a career perspective or an entrepreneur perspective, that it is not the horse trading business when the Model T came online. You can be romantically tied to something, but if you're on the wrong side of history on where trends are going, it could put you in a liable situation. So the pandemic has destroyed the classic dine-in business. There's no question about that. But it's also created tremendous opportunities in the food business on people who are using digital and ghost kitchens as an example. Ghost kitchens and third-party delivery partners are technology companies. Make no mistake about it. A headline from September 2020 in New York City. Nearly 2/3 of New York restaurants could be out of business as soon as January without any sort of government aid, a new study said. Restaurants across the Empire State have been struggling with the coronavirus. The latest survey, more than 1,000 restaurateurs across the state out of business. 64% of restaurant owners say they're likely or somewhat likely to close by the end of this year. And about 55% of those are likely to close and shut down before November. Only about 36% said they expect to be in business in January. That's the classic dine-in restaurant business. I'm from New York City. That's pretty sad for me. Having said that, though, let's look at the alternative side of that coin. These third-party partners, they are tech plays. Grubhub is a tech play. Uber Eats is a tech play. DoorDash, a tech play. Grubhub revenue up 40% and just informed a partnership with Lyft. Uber Eats, coronavirus keeping people at home, dampening the ride share. Gross bookings under Uber's mobility rides slumped 75% to $3 billion in second quarter, while the delivery segment, previously known as Eats, gross bookings more than doubled to $7 billion with a B. Tech company. Don't mistake it because it's somebody riding around on a bicycle or a car. That's the last mile. Stop judging companies on the last mile. Judge companies on the technologies and the services that are making them incredibly profitable and opening opportunities for you. Let me say that again. Do not judge a company as tech or non-tech based on the last mile of the delivery of its product or service. DoorDash, 46% of U.S. meal delivery businesses. 4 million users in 2018, 20 million users in 2020. Next time you look at somebody riding their bicycle with an insulated bag delivering something to your neighbor, that's a tech company. Don't judge it by the last mile. Design your career around the services in that tech company. There are people on telephones fulfilling things. There are people writing code. There are people doing UI, UX. There are people selling that service door to door. It's a tech company. It's also estimated that ghost kitchens alone, tech companies, people, they are doing analog movements by cooking amazing food, but pulling that all together is a technology on software delivery, service, etc. A $1 trillion global opportunity by 2030, estimated by Euromonitor. So look, how do you look at markets and processes and process future opportunities? One of the easiest ways to do that is consumers want convenience. This was true pre-pandemic, and it's painfully and obviously true right now in the middle of a pandemic. These consumer behaviors have only been magnified. We've been living in an on-demand technology for a long time. A large portion of it had been attributed to the younger generation, right? They wanted everything on demand now. And that on-demand forced consumer behavior created great categories. But guess what? There's my 75-year-old mom, my 90-year-old grandmother, if she was alive, would be living in an on-demand environment. because it's convenient and she had no other choice. She had to pick up the telephone. She had to click on a computer on demand. Technologies revolving around that. Genie's out of the bottle, not going back in at all. I'm going to go sidetrack here for a second on certain kind of careers. Nick, pull that up. So I got an email last night from a dear friend of mine. It said, the NBA successfully restarted and played an entire postseason with 0 positive cases. 0, right? And this person wrote this email to me celebrating it about teamwork and resilience and discipline, right? So over 6,500 people were inside the bubble. The season ended with LeBron James and the LA Lakers winning the NBA championship. Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, did this today. He informed league employees in a thank you letter that they will be receiving a $1,000 bonus and 4 Fridays off beginning October 30th, as well as Thanksgiving. My friend said, true leadership, true legend. Yeah, scroll that down for me. I read that and I sort of lost my mind. Here's why, and I want to read my response back because it puts context around things. On one hand, yes, brilliant. On the other hand, no. Billions of dollars thrown at having a bunch of men running around a wooden floor in their underwear, staying clean, as to each of them earning $1 million, introduces the dynamic of consequences. When much is at risk for powerful people, things get done. Would love to see the same celebration in an inner city where minorities are slugging it out and they are protected, as well as these sports prima donnas. Professional athletes being celebrated for protecting their income is far off my radar screen. They're entertainers. They're not teachers. They're not law enforcement. They're not nurses. They are entertainers. I just felt like that sidebar was really important as we look at careers and we look at people who keep the fabric of this country together. They are not basketball players. They are not football players. They are not hockey players or soccer players. They're the people who are swinging every day, deciding on who gets fed and who doesn't get fed a lot of times. And am I going to infect my child when I come home or my grandmother? Those are the real heroes. Okay, enough of that commercial. But it does drive me crazy. Not all professional athletes are jerk-offs, but a good percentage of them are. We are live now. Even better. I don't know when we went live, but here we are. The educational system. We need to look at this. There's a debate over how and where to educate students from preschool to university. We've got access to facility issues right now. We've got teacher shortages. We've got access to technology, internet, computers, broadband. Curriculums have not been developed for distance learning. University system was already at risk. I mean, when was the last time you actually had a product that has gone up 10x in cost? The value of it has gone down. Your ability to shake it off in bad debt. There's no such thing as claiming bankruptcy to shake that debt off. And when you come out of university, generally speaking, there's an expiration date on those. And you're trying to leverage that for the next 40 years. I personally believe that the education system is at risk. Most universities that are well-branded, like your MITs, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, UPenn, are going to do just fine. But your lower tier universities are likely not going to be around for a while. So think about that as you form your education process. Industry is stepping up. Verizon stepping up. Google stepping up. Amazon stepping up. They are all providing education outside classic educational systems to children, to adults who want to upskill and reskill and relearn. It's very important. In the 2020 divide that is at hand right now, the digital divide, it's become very serious. And connecting technology with people and connecting the digital wall and getting people over that digital wall is going to be more critical than ever. So, stakeholders. There's two key stakeholders right now in the world of work and what the world of work is going to look like moving forward. Industry and government. Industry moves incredibly fast. Government never does. And that's a good thing and a bad thing, because when governments move too quick, they always leave people behind. When they don't leave quick enough, they leave people behind. It's a no-win situation. Government is run by primarily 60 to 80-year-old white men who are disconnected, although they claim not to be disconnected from the heavy lifting that's going on in the lower tier of people from a career perspective. When outcomes of equality are exclusively legislated as what government tries to do, the results are almost always suboptimal. You can't legislate equality and fairness. But I will tell you, when they're driven by social responsibility and organizations and corporations, that it's okay for them to make billions of dollars. Stop getting pissed at them for that. But when you drive those opportunities, and it's not legislated, but you drive it by opportunity, putting in front of people, and I mean that by scholarships, technologies, you tend to get better outcomes. With that, the transition of the job market is in the hands of industry. It is not in the hands of government. If you leave it in the hands of government and somebody ever knocks at your door, and I forget who it was, maybe it was Reagan or maybe it was Bush, who knocked on the door and said, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help you." Oof, that generally does not work out very well. There are a lot of levers that have to be pulled right now, and they're going to be pulled by government as well as industry. And I'm hoping that the industry and the government work together on this. The push-pull of both of them is going to be incredibly important. I was doing some research for this, and I go back to the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 by Eisenhower that helped to transform the U.S. economy. That should be an analog for us for transforming the U.S. economy, given where we are right now. The economy was transformed because of the interstate system, because you can get commerce. You can get cars and trucks and people moving all around. You can allow people to get outside the cities to move into suburbia, which then drove housing and construction, and people bought refrigerators to put in the new houses that were built because they could drive a car on a highway and get away from the city. The exodus is here. The exodus is here from large cities. But the exodus is here from traditional thinking. It's a digital landscape. Only 30% of the people in our country have access to broadband. That means 70% do not. 15% of the world has access to broadband. 85% do not. We've got to take that same mindset of commerce that Eisenhower picked up back in 56 and his administration. And we have to think about, how do we open the highway of commerce? And that commerce is education. That commerce is access. The organizations and the governments that throw mountains of cash at infrastructure development around broadband and communication and digital are going to dominate the emerging marketplace. It's not the societies that are throwing tons of money at men in underwear running around wooden floors, throwing basketballs through a metal ring with a net on it, and disrespecting the people who are really doing the work. So government's going to have to legislate financial arrangements in recovering markets, strengthen and backstop social protections, because people are going to get screwed because of who they are, the demographic and psychographic they fall within, the color of their skin, their earnings, and the job they currently have. Government's going to have to backstop that. We're going to hope that industry, or ensure that industry, has a conscience about it and realizes that if you leave a category of people behind and create them as irrelevant, you're going to have an issue socially. Every society that's ever fallen from grace had made that mistake. So we're going to have to legislate data privacy 100%. We're going to have to safeguard information 100%. We're going to have to evolve this digital landscape and have as much equality as possible. Never has there been an easier play for equality of opportunity than right now with the digital landscape in front of us. Digital landscape does not have a conscience. Therefore, it can't be consciously or unconsciously biased, prejudiced, or racist. Giving me access to broadband, regardless of my skin or my gender or my age, is super easy to do. As you look at jobs, as you look at careers, You have to look at a broadband, digital-based career. You have to look at the labor, as we said earlier, in the delivery systems. Don't mistake the last mile for career choices because it's a labor and an analog engagement. It was an entirely digital experience to get there. So that's the world of work as I see it. We've got some questions on here. Dave Dart, how are you, my friend? Appreciate your time on that. Ashwin, education. We need to much creative in regards to reopen. Can you page that down for me, Nick? Are you on there? Yep, education. Modi Demri. Yeah, education is going to be critically important. We're obviously looking at a world right now that has not been set up. The curriculum has not been set up. The teachers have not been taught. The students have not been facilitated to learn in the environment we're in right now. Not sure what the answer is to that. My guess would be let's do a redo of the entire period of time. Why do we have to force people to go from 5th to 6th grade just because the year passed? The year passed because it was supposed to be the year that it always was. Guess what? It wasn't. So I'm suggesting that rather than cheat our next generation educationally, because this has been pretty much a blown year, and it may be 2 years. My guess is it is 2 years, by the way. I think we just redo it. Keep the 4th graders in 4th grade. Keep the 8th graders in 8th grade. There's very little downside to that. Sure, at a collegiate level, it will make a difference. Sure, how about the young girls and the young men graduating from high school that were hoping to be seen for college, and that was their only way out of high school into college to get it paid for? They're screwed, right? I say you do a redo. Everybody does a redo. I don't think you're going to get many complaints on that. What other questions do we have in here? Morrissey Dart, Ashwin. All right. I know we got started. I don't know when the live kicked in on this, but I'm told by my production crew that we're going to have this up on YouTube 10:30 or 11 o'clock. So I am at my 30-minute mark on this. I just asked you to think about the way things are. I didn't have any magic messages for you, which jobs to go after in particular, but keep in mind the Gretzky career hockey puck. Determine where the industry is going to be, not where it is right now. Think about careers 2 to 4 years out. Don't mistake the analog delivery system as being the job. That's the last mile. Behind every single service you're getting today in the world, which is 70% of the GDP, every single person-to-person service, behind that is a digital machine. Figure out how to plug into that. You're responsible for upskilling and reskilling. Nobody else is. Don't get pissed. You picked a major 25 years ago and you thought on cashing in your lifelong check on that. That world doesn't exist anymore. The rate of acceleration is going like this. The ability for us to adapt is like this. That's very true. In the middle lies the arbitrage of the opportunity. Astro Teller put that graph out a couple years ago. It's brilliant. Look it up. Astro Teller graph from Google. I'm Joe Mullings. Now I'm live from 160 Studios, Delray Beach. Be well.